issues. Today, we're talking about Title IX and Representative Greg Steube's bill, the Protection of Women and Girls in Sports Act. We've been hearing a lot about Title IX recently, so today we're going to break down what Title IX does, how the Biden administration wants to change it, and how conservatives in Congress have responded. First, let's talk about Title IX. Title IX has been around for 50 years, since the early 70s, and bars discrimination based on sex in education. This law was a milestone for women's opportunity and had an incredible impact on women's sports. By allowing women to have their own protected sports teams, women have been able to set historic records, qualify for elite teams or athletic scholarships, and chase their dreams at all levels of athletics. Next, let's talk about what the Biden administration is doing. Later this summer, the Biden administration is expected to change Title IX and interpret the word sex to also mean sexual orientation and gender identity. This is a gross rewriting of existing law by the executive branch and is a step backwards in creating equal opportunities for women. 50 years ago, when Congress wrote the law, sex meant male and female. The law was never meant to mean males who identify as females. If Biden rolls back long-standing Title IX protections, women and girls' sports will change forever. If we allow the left to ignore key anatomical differences between men and women, the biological women will be forced to compete against biological men to set records, earn scholarships, or qualify for advanced teams. Importantly, this rule change doesn't just affect college sports. It's also a way for the left to force their woke agenda into K-12 schools. Girls' sports will be impacted, but so will the safety of private places like bathrooms and locker rooms. Under the new rule, your daughter will be forced to share private places with men who identify as women. The left has gone so far in trying to redefine gender and gender identity that they have forgotten the initial goal of Title IX, to protect opportunities for women and girls. The consequences are already obvious. Take Leah Thomas, for example, a biological male swimmer who beat 3 talented female athletes because of the biological differences between their body types. This is only one example. This is happening in the NCAA and schools across the country. Earlier today, Representative Steube joined us to talk about the issue in his bill, the Protection of Women and Girls in Sports Act, and talk about how the left has long been leveling attacks against gender, starting with the Equality Act.
Several years ago, the Democrats passed the Equality Act that completely changed the definition of a woman. And in that, by virtue of that, completely undermines Title IX sports, which is women's sports. And we have seen a huge uptick, even since 2 years ago when the bill was heard, a huge uptick in biological males competing in women's sports. And even a constituent of mine was beaten by a biological male in a swimming meet that made a lot of headlines. So I filed an amendment years ago that would exempt Title IX sports from the Equality Act so that women's sports would be protected. Well, of course, every Democrat voted against it. Every Republican voted for it. And that was the genesis of filing, well, let's file a standalone bill to protect women's sports.
The bill that Representative Steube is talking about is the Protection of Women and Girls in Sports Act. Simply put, the bill would ensure that biological women only compete against other biological women, and that biological men only compete against other biological men. If a college or university violates that, they lose their federal funding. Sounds simple enough, right? Apparently not to the left. In their attacks on gender, Speaker Pelosi and Democratic leadership are refusing to bring Representative Steube's bill to the House floor for consideration. 0 House Democrats have even been willing to co-sponsor the bill in support. Finally, let's talk about how Representative Greg Steube and Representative Jim Banks are fighting back in Congress with the Protection of Women and Girls in Sports Act. With the limitations created by a Democrat-led Congress, Representative Steube has gotten creative in trying to force action on this important issue. With the help of the Republican City Committee Chairman Jim Banks, conservatives came up with a plan to get all members on the record. Earlier this year, Representative Jim Banks filed what is called a discharge petition on Representative Steube's bill. Representative Steube walked us through the process of how a discharge petition works and how many members of Congress need to sign on to trigger a vote.
As more and more attention has been brought to this issue, as more and more biological men are competing against biological women in collegiate activities, losing scholarships, losing rosters, biological men are in locker rooms with females, the more attention that has been brought to this issue. On the bill. We got a lot of co-sponsors on the bill, and then it was the thought between myself and RSC, the Republican Study Committee, to file a discharge petition to force a vote on this issue. Because I believe this is an issue the American people need to know where their elected representatives are on this issue. And we are up to 183 signatures obviously all Republican. If we are able to get to 218 signatures, that will force Speaker Pelosi to bring this bill to the floor for a vote.
So basically, we need 218 members to step up to the plate, put politics aside, and go on record supporting women and girls. What if we don't get to 218? We know that the left is pushing back against this bill and actually pushing to remove protections for women's sports. According to Rep. Steube, there's already been great momentum from the Republican side with 183 Republicans signing on to the discharge petition. Even if we don't break the 218 threshold this Congress, there's no doubt the momentum around this bill will carry conservatives into the next Congress. As Rep. Steube puts it,
183 Republicans that have signed on the Republican side. We're hoping to get to that 218 mark. There has, not surprisingly, not a single Democrat has signed on to the discharge petition. All Republicans, myself and Representative Banks are going to continue to work the conference to try to get more people on. But Kevin McCarthy, our Leader McCarthy, has already stated that this will be a priority for us when we take the House back. In November, when we get the gavels in January, he has stated that in the first 100 days, this is a bill that we will pass in a Republican majority. So if we're not able to get it done and force a vote on this in this Congress in 6 short months after the November elections when the Republicans take control of the House, we'll have a vote on this bill in the first 100 days.
discharge petitions are a tool often used in the minority to help force majority party leadership to hear a bill on a major issue. Aside from the Protection of Women and Girls in Sports Act, it has also, for example, been used by conservatives to try and trigger a vote on the Born Alive Survivors Protection Act. Now, for the last piece, what can we all do to help force a vote on the bill? We agree with Representative Steube that this issue is so important that we need to hold our representatives' feet to the fire on this. That's why we voted co-sponsorship of the Steube bill, scoring members negatively if they failed to sign on to support the bill. You can find the list of representatives who have signed on to the bill on our website, heritageaction.com. If your representative hasn't, we need you to urge them to put their name on that list. Our women and girls don't need to be the latest victims of the woke mob. We should have the same opportunities of biological men on and off the playing field. We shouldn't be forced to miss out on scholarships or be beat out for special teams or new records. Put plainly, this is unfair. This is a step in the wrong direction for women and girls who have trained their whole lives to achieve their goals. Biden's rule will impact your daughters, sisters, and granddaughters for generations to come. We all need to do our part to fight back against this rule and do what we can to save women's sports.
That's it for another episode of On